What's up, everybody? Welcome to Showtime, Wrestling for TV and WWE and MLW. My name is AJ Kirsch, and I appreciate all of you being here today for this, my fourth Zoom seminar, I think, since shelter in place became a thing. And the purpose of today's seminar is to share my experience and my guest speaker's experience to get you better acquainted with what to expect should you ever participate in a televised wrestling event. And luckily, that means a lot more now than it did, 2 years ago. That pretty much only meant what? WWE, Impact, Lucha Underground was still a thing 2 years ago, I think. And now, obviously, there's AEW, MLW starting to make some noise. So there are a lot more options when it comes to televised wrestling. And if a future in pro wrestling is what you're pursuing, whether it be as a wrestler, a referee, a broadcaster, a producer, or anything else, there are more opportunities than ever to get your piece of the pie in televised pro wrestling. So that's one of the reasons why I thought this would be a good time for this seminar. Just because, like I said, there's a much bigger pie nowadays, or, there are multiple pies. So we're in a good spot right now. Now, we've got a smattering of guest speakers here this afternoon, one of whom worked as an extra for WWE, very unique circumstances, basically. She was called in the day of a Raw taping and was put in a match on Raw, specifically because they needed a female talent. And for whatever reason, I think there were actually multiple female wrestlers present. Maybe not. I don't exactly remember. But she got a call in the middle of the day and was like, hey, can you be here at this time? We need you. She was able to make it happen, and she was super green. It was only her 7th career match that she was actually in a match on Raw. Didn't actually take a bump. Was never even in the ring. But nonetheless, her 7th career match was a match on Raw. She will be speaking a little bit later on, and I'm really excited to get her perspective as somebody who is still very green in wrestling to kind of share what was going through her mind when she was backstage at WWE, which for a lot of people is the show. You've got myself and Dave Dutra, who have worked as extra talent at WWE many, many times. We obviously, our shining moment was around a year ago when we were the defending Yolo County Tag Team Champions. Heavy Machinery, you fucking cowards, we won our rematch. We're going to get to Dutra to kick things off here momentarily after a little bit more of a brief introduction. We've also got a rising star in MLW, Richard Holliday, who is in a unique position to share his insight as somebody who's been a part of a mid-sized promotion for quite some time now. AEW, WWE, they're considered obviously large promotions, and MLW, big enough to travel, big enough to have a television deal with multiple outlets worldwide. So I wasn't even familiar with the term mid-sized promotion, but it is an accurate description. So we're going to hear from somebody who is doing television for a mid-sized promotion, trying to grow it as much as possible, but also somebody who also works a lot of independent shows. And Dutra, to his credit, still works a lot of indie shows as well. So getting their perspective on the differences between working a show specifically for television versus working a show for the live audience. A lot of details, a lot of differences between the two, and I hope we can get into that a little bit later on. As far as non-wrestling talent goes, we're going to be hearing from former WWE referee Marty Elias, who was with the company for, decades, I think. And he's probably best known for refereeing what a lot of people consider the greatest match of all time, Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels from WrestleMania 25. He obviously played a big role in that match, taking that ref bump on the outside, that set up that super scary dive with Undertaker over the top and onto that cameraman who barely caught him. So that was a scary moment. But I'm really excited to hear from somebody who has spent so much time at WWE and somebody who can shed light on how to kind of massage or guide the match for television. The referee has, ultimately it's up to the talent what the talent does, but the referee is instrumental in guiding the talent in, you know, where to position themselves in the ring and timing. And, you know, timing is so crucial when it comes to television, because if one thing rolls over, the entire show has to be rewritten. Sometimes matches and segments get scrapped, and you know you're not cutting into advertising time. So if something has to go, it's something on the show. So super excited to get Marty Elias's insight. He'll be joining us around the top of the hour, and also broadcasting for pro wrestling. I've been with MLW now for about 8 months or so. Last October was my first show, and my first proper gig with MLW, because the first show I did for them was as co-promoting with Crash in Tijuana. So it wasn't exactly a full-blown MLW show, but my first show with MLW was live worldwide pay-per-view, their debut pay-per-view. And I had never called wrestling for live television in my life. So I'm really excited to share what I've learned as a broadcaster and what it means to be a part of a televised wrestling production from the broadcast standpoint. So we're getting a bunch of different insights, wrestlers, referees, broadcasting, and from a bunch of different points in our careers too. So who the fuck am I? My name is AJ Kirsch. I first got notoriety in the 2011 season of Tough Enough, which you can find on the WWE Network if you haven't seen it. And it was on Tough Enough that I realized my contributions to pro wrestling might be more valuable behind a mic than in the ring. But at the time, coming out of Tough Enough, wrestling was still my focus. It was still the dream. It was still my highest priority. I just figured to make myself a more valuable talent, it was a good time to start diversifying what I was good at. I was always good at wrestling, I guess. I was always like fine, passable. I don't know that I was anything particularly special in the ring. So the more I developed my gift for gab as a commentator and host and announcer, the more I was like, oh, this is a way better fit for me. But a few months after, excuse me, a few months after Tough Enough was over, so this is now like June of 2011, which was 9 years ago. Good freaking Lord. I received my first opportunity as extra talent with WWE when I was absolutely demolished by Brodus Clay on an episode of WWE Superstars. And that was kind of the first taste of a day in the life at a WWE taping. I've probably done a half dozen stints as extra talent since then. And, you know, that included being security, that included be doing nothing. Sometimes they just ask you to wrestle a match before doors open just to get an idea of what you're capable of in the ring. And that may be the only thing you do for Monday and Tuesday. And in some cases, Sunday as well, if they have you as an extra at a pay-per-view, a Raw, and a SmackDown. Now I guess the order would be a little bit different. But back then it was pay-per-views Sunday, Raw Monday, SmackDown Tuesday. And of course, most recently, and probably the most recognizable moment as an extra with WWE, myself and Dave Dutra were the Yolo County Tag Team Champions, again, just about a year ago on SmackDown. In fact, a week ago Thursday was the 1-year anniversary. And I hate to be critical of WWE, but I'm like, I swear to God, they need to do more with those Yolo County Tag Team Championships. They are just sitting on a gold mine by literally not printing out cardboard and selling it as a merchandise item. And so what I'd like to do right now, rather than diving into my perspective, I've already kind of set the stage for what you can expect for later on in the seminar. But what I'd like to do right now is invite my Yolo County tag team partner, Dave Dutra. By the way, still very grateful for you loaning me your gear for that spot. Otherwise, it definitely would not have gone the way that I would have liked it to. I'm going to introduce Dave Dutra, who is a veteran of pro wrestling at this point. He and I kind of broke in around the same time. We had a hell of a feud in All Pro Wrestling back when it was at the world famous Garage. He's one of my favorite opponents. I think to this day, that match you and I had where Will Rude came out to be the referee at the very end is one of my all-time favorite matches, and is God, currently killing it at Best of the West, a company that is televised. Well, kind of televised here and there. It's shot for television, but so it's a televised indie company. He's champion there, if I remember correctly, before COVID-19 happened. Perhaps even a double champion, I think. One half of the tag champs and the world champion. So I've introduced him quite enough. I'm going to bring him on. Dave, I appreciate you being here. Again, apologies for the mix-up and brain farting the wrong time. Let's see. I'm just going to make sure. Go ahead and say something just to make sure we got you unmuted here.
Well, can you hear me, AJ?
Got you. Loud and clear. So yeah, I appreciate you being here. And one of the reasons you were one of the first people I thought of to contact for the seminar, just because you have been backstage at WWE a number of times. You've been in their system, and you've both worked WWE television. I think you were flirting with Impact back when they were TNA for a little while. So you're like no stranger to working for a televised production, even Best of the West, even though it's not nearly the scale of WWE or Impact, that is a televised show. It is shot for television. And I guess one of the first things I wanted to ask you, and to kind of just an open-ended question for you to dive in, is what were some of the biggest differences when working for a televised show versus just strictly a live audience, and specifically WWE, because I think there's still a lot of mystery surrounding what exactly goes into a WWE televised match, because even though it was 2.5, 3 minutes, that match with us and Heavy Machinery had so much go into it. And I'd love for you to speak on that for a little bit.
Yeah, I think we probably spent 10 times the amount of time planning that match than we were in the rings. I think that match timed at like 1 minute, 1 second.
Wow, not even 3 minutes.
But I swear to God, we must have planned out that entire thing for 30, 40 minutes?
Right,
in total.
At ringside, yeah.
I mean, between Best of the West or all the times that I've been to WWE, I think the big difference is that the scale of the production and what you change your focus on when you're just wrestling on a show in front of a live audience and nothing more, you have a little more wiggle room, a little more freedom to sort of craft what you want to craft and present it into the ring. The way you sell and focus your time and effort changes, because you're spending it more on just looking at all the angles, drawing contact into the eyes of maybe one or two key individuals at ringside, whatever you're doing in that regard. Once you shift to something that's television related, the focus really goes to all the cameras.
Right.
You really aren't focusing on anyone in the crowd. You're putting your eyes directly on cameras, the hard cam, the roaming cam, depending on where you are. You generally will have an agent that's going to help you craft what you're doing. In other situations not related to television, you really have a lot more freedom to do what you want. But otherwise, with production, especially WWE, you're working with one or two agents, and they are really crafting what they envision more so than what you envision. You can, maybe as you get higher up and in the company, you have a little more input, or you can sway that. But at least in my experience, and I'm sure yours as well, they're pretty much crafting the entire segment for you, and they just want to make sure that you can do that. That's the biggest difference, and that in time. On an indie show, time is still important, and they have, a certain time for the show that they carve out, and they want to make sure they get people in and out. They don't want to drag things, right? But with television, especially advertising dollars, they have to really make sure that you get in and out in a timely manner. And I don't know if we want to segue that into the Heavy Machinery match and how sensitive they were with time.
I think it's a great time to do that, because it wasn't just, figuring out how much time was going to be set aside for our match. They had a promo leading into that. They had Daniel Bryan and Eric Rowan, I believe, or
that's right.
Eric Rowan, yeah.
Eric
so
Rowan.
They had them out there to cut a promo. Then they had Heavy Machinery coming out, and they had a promo to cut. And it's like, you've got a certain amount of time that you can say, okay, we want it to be this long. But what ultimately happens out there, especially when it's live, you've got to be able to roll with the punches. And so I'm sure you remember this. There was, when we were talking it over with the official, who I believe was a NorCal guy, right? Didn't he come out of SPW or something?
Yeah, Brian Wen.
Right. And he was even telling us before we went out, before the promo, before the Heavy Machinery promo, that it's like, it's either going to be plan A or plan B. And plan B means we cut out a bunch of stuff and just get right into it, or it's plan A and we actually have a little bit more time. That's one of the things that I remember, but please share what you remember about just being like, okay, there's any number of different ways this could happen, so you got to be on your toes.
And just to tell you how many pieces there are to this puzzle that is WWE and their production, you know, we had 2 agents that we were working with. I think it was Chris Parks and Shane Helms.
You're right.
So they're, you know, giving us their vision of how they want everything to go.
By the way, those who don't know, Chris Parks was Abyss in Impact.
Right. Yeah. Great guys. They were super cool to work with.
Right.
They had planned a match that was likely going to go about 2 to 2.5 minutes originally. And we had a lot more things they wanted us to take. Actually, I still think you got scot-free with the hip toss and you were done. And I was going to take
about toss, clothesline, call it a night. I'm good.
They'd have to take 5 or 6 more bumps.
Right.
And then they run that up the chain. And then they come back. And, you know, as the show was going, I mean, at this point, I think the show had started. And they're going, okay, we have to cut this down. So here's what we're going to do. And then we go over.
There was a Miz segment or something that they said went like 6 minutes long.
Right.
So they're right off the bat, the first segment of the show, they're already trimming stuff. And they're, you know, running, scrambling, yelling, just being like it's kind of chaotic backstage. Like, it's easy to eviscerate WWE if the content isn't amazing, but I don't think they really get enough credit for having to adjust on the fly as often as they do.
100%. I mean, it's live television too. So if it was a TV taping, that might be one thing, but because it's live, you don't have room to do much other than just scramble on the fly and make changes. So, you know, then we're like, okay, what are we cutting? What are we keeping? And that's when the plan A and plan B came in. So plan A, you know, you take 1 bump, AJ comes in, boom, you roll out, and then I take 2 or 3 more. And then plan B was, if time permits, I take, like, instead of 3 bumps, I take 6 bumps or something to that effect. But everything else remained the same. So that was just eye-opening in the sense of how important timing is and just the moving parts that is the WWE machine. You know, there's so many people they need to answer to. And I remember a portion of it in which Shane came up to me, or actually both of us, and he was talking about he was very annoyed with the promo or that was written for Daniel Bryan. Because Daniel Bryan in that promo announces in Sacramento County, but I mean where the Golden One Center is and West Sacramento, which is part of Yolo County. I mean, we're talking a bridge of water. So a lot of the people that are going to the show live in Yolo County, and they wanted Heavy Machinery to be cheered and to be over. So he came up to us like, I can't believe they're going to announce you guys are from Yolo County. That's going to put you guys over. I don't. Right. It's like, you just watch. It's going to happen, and it's not what I want. And then he complains to Chris Parks, and Chris Parks, yeah, but if we have to run that back to the writers if we change it. And it was just like so many moving parts. It's just sort of, it's crazy to me. Right. But
if you go back and watch the segment, we got to pop. When they announced Yolo County, pointing at the belts, we got to pop.
I mean, we are like NorCal locals, right? So I know there was a lot of people that knew us. True. A few people like yell names as we were during the commercial break, we're coming down the ramp. Right. People yell Hood Slam for you and Brosive and all that other thing. So people knew us, but the fact they said Yolo County, I'm sure there were people who had no idea who we were in that building. Oh, yeah. But because of Yolo County, we got cheered like crazy. And I remember coming back through the curtain in Gorilla, and Shane, I looked at him and I'm like, you were 100% right. He's like, I told you. Yeah, what'd I tell you? You need to be cheered. I knew that line would get you guys to be cheered. So yeah. But yeah, I was gonna say, you mentioned it earlier. Just wanted to say you're welcome again. Just so I don't rub it in, these are my trunks. It's just so lucky that I had an extra pair that AJ wore.
That's them, and I guarantee you, everybody who knew us was just like, "Is AJ in Dutra's gear?" Because I've never been the trunks and kick pads type. Like it just hasn't been my jam. And the stuff that I brought was so like gimmicky. It was Brosif stuff, and I wore it to the ring, and they were like, "You go put on your gear." So I put on that stuff, and then they're like, "Oh, that's too gimmicky. Do you have any generic stuff?" And then, I was like, well, we need to look like a tag team. And so I just borrowed Dutra's gear, and I don't think I'm ever going to hear the end of it. So you were definitely a lifesaver that day in letting me borrow your gear.